Hello and welcome back to another edition of Profiles and Issues, the cable television talk show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. My special guest for tonight's discussion is Westchester County Executive George Latimer. But first, this brief commentary. The major topic for discussion on our program: undocumented immigrants are now being sent to Westchester County for shelter and processing. Is it working? One of the most important issues that has re-emerged in the news and is now affecting Westchester residents directly is the large migration of undocumented immigrants at the Mexico border into the United States seeking asylum. Since the 1970s, Republicans and Democrats have been addressing undocumented immigration unsuccessfully by trying to provide stronger border patrols and setting up deportation and detention camps. In recent months, Republican governors in Texas and other border states have been sending in large numbers of undocumented migrants in busloads to northern and west coast cities to obtain food, lodging, and legal processing for citizenship if they qualify. These actions have contributed to creating a lack of resources by mayors and leaders in big cities to feed, shelter, and process these individuals. As a result, Westchester County now faces the same challenges as New York City. How do Westchester leaders and citizens feel about the additional responsibilities of dealing directly with the migration process and undocumented immigration? And now my interview with County Executive George Latimer. George Latimer, great to see you again, and welcome back to Profiles and Issues.
Nice to be with you, Dennis.
Has the migration of asylum-seeking immigrants in Westchester been one of the most controversial and challenging issues facing your administration?
I mean, it is, in that the country is divided philosophically on immigration. You have two different schools of thought, and in one of them, you heard President Trump say we need to build a big wall, a beautiful big wall, and keep immigrants out completely. And there are people that believe that very strongly. Then you have on the other side of the coin, I'm not sure they're equal numbers, but people on the other side that see the humanitarian need as it exists, and it does exist, and what we have to do to try to address that humanitarian need. It requires us to make an outreach and treat people as our neighbors. So somewhere in that competition in concepts are those of us in county government who now have to administer a reality. The reality is that there are placements of migrant asylum seekers in our area. We do not have the authority to stop them from coming in. All those executive orders that were done by different county executives, they were all determined to be illegal by the federal court. And so now how do I manage that process? How do we get our various departments, Department of Health, Department of Public Safety, to manage the process and make it effective so that while the people are here, and hopefully not for an unlimited amount of time, but while they're here, that the people who live in Westchester County feel safe. They feel that there's no crime that's going to generate out of that. They feel there's no spread of disease that's going to come out of that. Those are the things that I'm tasked with being responsible for as part of this. So did we anticipate it? No, not particularly. The problem at the border is an overwhelming problem. But, you know, it's the governor of Texas who decided to put them on buses to New York City.
Right.
Yeah,
we've gone into that. But, you know, as you say, not only the country is divided, but locally. Here in Westchester, towns like Pleasantville, counties like Rockland, Orange, and Putnam are trying to fight it. Now, are they fighting it in the local courts now, or what?
Well, you're referring actually to the town of Mount Pleasant, not to Pleasantville. Where the town supervisor issued an executive order. Excuse me. And then in some of the other neighboring counties, Rockland, Orange, they've done executive orders, and there are some court cases that are pending relative to their executive orders. So far, I think the court system is going to come down on the side that the town government, a city government, a village government, and a county government cannot proclaim that there is a natural disaster for which you then get executive authority because there are migrants being placed here. And that's sort of the correlation. And I think, the people that are, calling this a crisis, they're calling it a crisis because philosophically they don't believe they should be here. But it is not the same thing as a tornado that devastates homes, or a flood that devastates homes and people's lives and livelihoods. So I think the division in the society that exists. How we handle it is really a test of our leadership and our managerial skill.
You have publicly stated that you are willing to support the issue, and you even quoted the Bible.
I did.
Which was inspiring. But so I'd like you to make the case here why you support it, and we'll take it from there.
Well, you have to ask yourself, is there legitimate issues in the third world, particularly in Latin America, that would give people an honest reason to walk 1,000 miles with no possessions, with a child or 2 children, to seek asylum in another country, leaving behind everything else? It has to be pretty horrific for someone to want to do that. You see in Venezuela and some other countries of Latin America, the structure of the government has collapsed. There's grinding poverty, rural poverty and urban poverty. You have bands of marauding people that prey on decent people. You have drug cartels that will snatch your child, take your son and make him a drug runner, snatch your daughter and have her, service the drug runners. This is unacceptable to any person who's ever been a parent. In my case, a parent and now a grandparent. So I understand why people come to the border seeking a better life. And so the question I have to ask myself is, what is my responsibility, not as a county executive, not as a Democrat, but as a human being in a world where we have certain philosophical beliefs? And that's when I quoted the Bible, the book of Matthew, which is sacred to Christians. When did I see you naked, hungry, a stranger in this land? When you saw it for the least of my brothers, then you saw it to me. In the Jewish faith, there's a phrase called tikkun olam, which is prepare the world. Now, I'm not Jewish, but I understand what that means in the theology and the thinking of the Jewish faith. And in both of those cases, that sets a moral standard. What is our responsibility? Is our responsibility to solve the problems of the whole world? No, it can't be that. We don't have those resources. But is it to turn a blind eye? No, I can't accept that. And to go to the ramparts and to be angry about it, and to accuse this of being an invasion of thugs and rapists into the country, it's just not accurate. Let me say this. I'm of Irish and Italian background. When the Irish came here, now my Irish antecedents did not come in 1840. That was the time of the great Irish migration, the great hunger in Ireland. When they came to America, they came here, quote unquote, legally, because there were no restrictions of them coming here. But when they came here, they were not welcomed. They were treated as underclass individuals. They were treated as the scum of Europe. The signs in the window, if you were Irish and you were looking for a job, N-I-N-A, Nina, no Irish need apply. They were prejudiced to the extreme degree. They even had a political party that was created called the Know Nothing Party, which was an anti-immigrant party, ran for the presidency. Fast forward 40 years, 1880, 1890. There was a great influx of Italian-American immigrants. That's the other major ethnicity. I have a couple of other ethnicities in there, but those are the 2 major ones. And the Italians who came here came from southern Italy. They were in rural poverty. They were peasants. They were under the thumb of a central government. They were under the thumb of the mob. They were under the thumb of a militaristic local leaders that would take their benefit and give them nothing in return. They came to America seeking a better life. When they came to America, they were not considered equal. In fact, they had swarthier skin, and they couldn't speak English, which put them as cast asides. Fast forward another couple of years, 20 years or so, you had an exodus coming out of Eastern Europe and countries near Russia of people who were Jewish. They came here. They didn't even share the Christian religion, much less the Protestant branch of Christianity. They too were treated as outsiders. Over the course of the last 100 years, the Irish, the Italian, and the Jewish community have been assimilated into the American mainstream. Top leaders of business, of finance, medicine, government, media are Jewish and Italian and Irish. And I might add Asian, Chinese, or Japanese. What does that tell me? That tells me there has always been an anti-immigrant feeling amongst some people in this country, and it has always been misplaced anger. It's fear of the unknown. It's fear of loss of control or loss of status. And over the long haul, the Irish, the Italian, the Polish, the Jewish, the Chinese, the Japanese, the variety of ethnicities that came to this country strengthened America. We became stronger economically because of it. That's the case for working with immigrants as opposed to rejecting them.
Well said. But there is also today, I think, another aspect, and that is a fear of lack of resources to go around. In other words, you know, you make a strong moral case, but the economic case, where will the county obtain the necessary funding to feed, clothe, shelter, and legally process the migrants if they are not sanctuary cities like Yonkers?
Well, first of all, there's no sanctuary cities. Let's get that out of the terminology.
Didn't Yonkers receive money because
hold on. Let's be clear. The phrase sanctuary city is generally used by some communities that have said, if you're here illegally, we will protect you anyway from the force of the law. To my knowledge, no community in Westchester County, and the county itself has never offered that type of protection. That's different from a person who legally seeks asylum in the United States and came over the border in Texas, was told to stay, housed in place in Texas until your case could be adjudicated. The governor of Texas comes to people, say, listen, you can house in New York City. Get on these buses. This will take you to New York City. And they do that. So they come legally, not in a sanctuary situation. And you have to stop the rhetoric because there's a lot of things being said that isn't true. And the language is being used to color the way people view this. Now, let's go to the core of the issue.
Just one thing, because I have
well,
to...
you raised the question about money, and I want to address that.
Okay.
So, the reality is that New York City has on its books a law that requires shelter for any individual that comes into the environment. So people get off the buses from Texas, sent by the governor of Texas, and now they appear at the Port Authority bus terminal, and it's now the challenge of New York City to house them and feed them. That is the immediate responsibility, to your question, of the basic requirements in New York City. Now, New York City reaches a maximum capacity, and they start to negotiate with motels and hotels outside of New York City. That's how we get 3 placements in Westchester County, and there's placements in other places. Now, who pays for the food and the shelter? In the short term, it's New York City. But if the federal government moves off the dime, if they allow for work visas for these individuals, then these individuals will be able to legally work in the United States while they're waiting for their cases to be adjudicated. And when they're working, then they're earning money to pay their own way, and they don't need the handout to pay for them. Let me go further. When you look at what has to happen here, I've argued that the federal government should create in White Plains, right here by the federal court, at the federal courthouse, a federal immigration court in Westchester to adjudicate the cases of the people that are housed here. So they're here temporarily, hear their cases in White Plains, adjudicate them through. If they're going to be granted asylum, grant them asylum. If they're not going to be granted asylum, then return them back to their native country, but make the process move quickly so they're not here for a year, 2 years, and they require subsidy from the rest of us. That's what we're striving for, Dennis. We're striving for people to have sort of the normal American experience where you work hard, you struggle, but you achieve and you make it better for the next generation. That's what we're striving for.
Well, you answered part of my next question. The reason why I stated that sanctuary city is because in my research, I did come across some articles that said that the reason why the mayor of New York City gave some money to Yonkers, that's what the article said, because
the article I think is wrong. You have to, as you know, because you're a responsible journalist. Right. Just because somebody says it doesn't mean it's accurate.
Yeah, I should have double checked. Okay, so we started to talk about. You started to go into a type of I guess, legal infrastructure that needs to be put in place to process their cases quickly, to get them working papers and on a path to citizenship. Are you talking about like setting up satellite field immigration courts?
Yes. Well, what I think, and I'm not saying you set it up out in a tent in a field.
No.
That we have a United States District Courthouse here, Southern District of New York, right here in White Plains. And in my way of thinking, there's no reason not to have an immigration court impaneled here. And if they say we don't have enough judges, fine. Then you make an effort because you've got all these all these people that have come across the border. You impanel additional judges. You can look at retired judges, give them some training on immigration, and put them on the case, and adjudicate the cases here of the people in Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, Dutchess, Orange County, the northern suburbs, have their cases transferred here, have them go through the adjudicative process and come to closure so that you can speed the process. If you do that, then the housing that they have now becomes temporary housing, not permanent housing. And if they can work in the meantime, and then if they're granted asylum and they stay in the country, and then they continue to work and grow their career, then you have a process that financially works for itself. It isn't, on the backs of all of the rest of us. And I think that's a practical way to go. The federal government, frankly, has failed over multiple administrations.
Yes.
Now, the Republicans out there now want to blame Joe Biden. The Democrats want to blame Donald Trump. And then the Republicans want to blame Barack Obama. And the Democrats want to blame George W. Bush. And this is the partisan advantage. I'm a Democrat, but I'm not looking to blame anybody. I'm just looking to speed the process properly. And if we dropped all of the, you said this and he said this, well, what about this? Well, what about that? All of that stuff is unproductive. What is productive is to move forward, I think, in some of the ways that I've suggested. And if you can do those things, then we can manage this crisis. But it can't just be New York shouldering the burden of this. When you're the governor of Texas and you put people on a bus and you send them, 2,000 miles to New York, you go right past Chattanooga, Tennessee. You don't drop any off in Chattanooga. You don't drop any off in Raleigh, North Carolina. You're playing politics with it. You're making sure that they go to a Democratic area, not a Republican area. And I think that's the lack of a federal program that's needed here. And at some point in time, when we establish some limits to how many people can come into the country, and we expand that, keep in mind, we need the raw labor that many of these immigrants provide.
I was going to ask
well,
you
then
about
ask and I'll
that,
answer.
but there are certain things. One of the things that must be difficult is you've mentioned the word temporary, but how long is temporary? Does anybody have a handle on this? Because it goes back to the fact that these foreign governments like Mexico have problems. That's why the people want to get out. So how long is temporary?
Well, that's a question I can't answer as a local official. This is the criticism that I think we all have over the federal government and the lack of a cohesive policy that extends back not only through the Biden administration, but through the Trump administration and the Obama administration and the George Bush administration. I have to credit George W. Bush, who tried to address this issue and could not get enough support on his side of the aisle. John McCain was also supportive of an issue, an effort to try to deal with this issue. And both of them represented states, Texas and Arizona, that are on the southern border that face the brunt of these issues. But let me tell you, as New York, we may be a long way away from the southern border, but we were the portal for immigration throughout the 1900s and the 1800s. Everyone came to New York. They came past the Statue of Liberty for a reason. They didn't go into to the same degree. They didn't go into other ports around the world, around the country. So the question of temporary is essential to this, because no one can live over an extended period of time in a hotel room. That's not a viable situation. And if we're worried about problems occurring, they will occur if it's a long-term residency. So the federal government has to see this as an urgent priority and do exactly what I've said. Now, because there is a space to absorb more immigration as workers in some of the entry-level jobs, it's a place to start out in the economy. There is a public policy reason to have more of that labor force come into the United States. And they come in, they have an opportunity to work, which they didn't in their home country. They have an opportunity to live in peace, which they didn't in their home country. And they have an opportunity to earn and grow. The problem is political, is the fact that some number of people are just angry and afraid that they don't want people who are different from them in this country, and they're afraid it's going to change the makeup of the country. My argument is that fear is misplaced, because we've had other immigrant tides over the years, and America was big enough and strong enough to absorb that immigrant tide and to have a stronger America as an end result. But how you view that politically is how you're going to vote. And there's a presidential election in 2024, and that will probably determine whether we have a policy that moves this way or that way.
I don't want to get into another topic, but I will mention it briefly. AOL, people, there was articles and information that the technology, like with Uber, excuse me, they're taking away jobs from cab drivers. This is why I think it's a little more complicated at this time in our country's history than it was past.
Well, yes, except with an asterisk. When the combustion engine was created, and I don't know who gets the credit for it, Henry Ford or somebody prior to Henry Ford, all of the blacksmiths in America found that they didn't have a viable career anymore. The smart blacksmiths converted into learning how to operate a combustion engine. And so they closed up their blacksmith shop and they opened up an auto repair shop. We've had technology create new jobs over the course of my lifetime, where we had people who did a function in an office, and now that function is obsolete. It's done electronically. But it requires people to accept the fact that there's change, and we all deal with change differently. And some of us embrace change, and sometimes you embrace change when you're a younger person. You don't embrace it when you're an older person. So I think the economic changes that we face through artificial intelligence, no one knows where that's going to end. Certainly my lifetime on this planet won't be significant enough to see all of that happen. But when we see that technological change, when we see the change of what we have to do with in terms of climate change, there is an opportunity to grow our economy, but we have to accept that change is at hand. When we fight it and resist it, and we try very hard to put up walls against that change, change comes anyway, and there's a greater dislocation when it does come. So I don't think automatically that because we have a group of immigrants in the country that is going to take away existing jobs. I think there's a way to expand and grow, and there's always going to be a place for labor in this society. Just the agricultural fields, we don't see many of them in Westchester County. We see people doing the gardening work. But the agricultural fields requires a lot of manpower in order to get the product off the vine and into the storehouse when the growing season ends. And I believe there's sufficient work if it can be structured properly. But I think, again, you have a natural unwillingness by some people to change, and a natural tendency where people dislike people who don't look like them, don't worship the way they do.
All right. Will Westchester County lose any subsidies or tax reductions in the 2023 proposed operating budget as a result of this situation?
Well, I'm not worried about the current budget impacts for the 2023 year. We have sufficient reserves to handle what might come our way should there be excessive costs that we haven't anticipated because of the migrant presence. You have to remember, right now, we have, in round numbers, 350 migrant individuals here, asylum seekers here in Westchester County. In 2018, people forget this, in 2018, we had over 1,000 migrant children housed in Westchester. This is when the Trump administration was dividing children from parents at the border. They had to house their children somewhere, and they made arrangement at 4 different locations: Rising Sun in Yonkers, Abbott House, Children's Village, and Lincolndale Hall in Somers. So we've dealt with 1,000 migrants housed in this county 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, whatever it was. So we've been down this street, and we haven't even reached that number yet at 350. So what I would say is that I don't anticipate an economic impact in the foreseeable term. This is why you have to have the federal government solve the problem on a macro level, because if we do wind up in year 2 and year 3 of this, then there can be problems with it. And so the federal government has to do its share, and sooner rather than later, so that we don't wind up with a bigger hit.
All right, we're moving quick, so I need a little shorter answers. I want to talk just a little bit about housing. Why did you reject Governor Hochul's proposed housing plan in her 2023 budget to build, I believe it's 800,000 units across the state by mandating their communities with a Metro North station to increase housing by 3%?
We did not reject the Hochul housing plan. I embraced the fact that she prioritized housing as a key issue, and we completely accepted the fact of setting goals, 3% goals, to achieve additional housing units. So to that portion of it, we were supportive of the plan, and I've said that both at the time and subsequently. The plan had 2 elements in it that were problematic. One of them was the override of local zoning to authorize a particular project which might be rejected in the community. And the second concern we have was an automatic circle around every train station that would allow for more dense population. In Westchester County, we have 44 train stations. 10 of them already have transit-oriented development that's going up amazingly. We're sitting, as we're taping this, in downtown White Plains, and you see the cranes outside. There's at least 2 cranes outside of our front window building affordable housing near a train station. It's happening in New Rochelle. It's happening near the Yonkers downtown train station. It's happening between the Tarrytown and the Phillips Manor train stations. It's on the books at the Portchester area. It's happening in Harrison, recently opened in Mamaroneck. So the transit-oriented development problem was if you take a spot and you put a 2-mile circle around it, here's what happens. Along the Hudson line, which goes up the river, Yonkers to Peekskill, a 2-mile radius, half of it's in the Hudson River. So you can't do it there. And if you know the topography of the Hudson, most of the train stations are down on a level piece of land near the water, and there's a steep slope that takes you up to Broadway, Route 9. So a 2-mile radius around that station is not a practical implementation. You have the same problem when you go up the Bronx River in a place like Scarsdale. To the west of the Scarsdale station is the steep slope of Edgemont. You're not going to build apartment buildings there. Let's go further north. Well, it's important. It's important to get the substance.
Getting towards the end.
I understand, but it's important to understand the substance. The plan can be reconfigured without mandates and be effective. But what it has to do is use transit-oriented development as a tool in individual communities to get more housing rather than as a mandated requirement. If you use it as a tool in some places and incentivize, you can get it to build affordable housing. So the plan is reworked, and it has a great chance for success.
County Executive George Latimer, I could talk to you all day on these issues, but we're out of time. Thank you very much for coming on Profiles and Issues. It's always great to see you.
Dennis, it's a pleasure, and we'll come back again.
All of our programs can be seen on our website online at any time for free at www.thedennisrudinshow.com, profilesandissues.com, and of course White Plains Community Media. Please send your comments about our program to profile.issue@yahoo.com. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.